So can an existing E2 business realistically qualify to the EB5 if the person is already here? Edward, what are the challenges providing lawful source of funds? But to wrap it up, can you share like a case or like a success story that you'd like to share with us? Hi everyone and welcome on today's episode. I'm Eliana Gimenes. I work with investors. They're looking for E2, L1s and EB5 visas and they plan to move to the United States. And I'm joined by someone like that I really don't need a lot of introduction. Um, Edward Beshara, he is the managing partner of Beshara. Edward has been practicing law in the US since '83. He's guiding both investors and corporations around the world for many years. E2s, L1s, EB5 processes. He's very well known as a speaker, as an author, and is a recognized leader in the field. So welcome to our webinar, Edward. Today, we're going to be talking about, I think, a very hot topic, which is the transition between E2 and EB5. So let's get started. Um, Thank you once again. Do you want to start off just like telling us a little bit, walk a bit through this process between E2 and EB5s?
Yes, thank you, Eliana. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And as you just stated, I've been doing E2s and EB5s for many years, E2s since '83, EB5s for 32 years. And of course, some of the policies, some of the regulations and laws have changed over the years for both E2 and EB5. But we like the E2. And when I first did the E2s back 40 plus years ago, it was a little bit different, where an investor could make an investment and basically not irrevocably commit the funds and then move on with an E2. But today, there are certain specific requirements for an E2. We have to show that before we submit the E2 application, they have to irrevocably commit the funds, and we can discuss that later. And then, of course, now with the EB5, we have a lot of clients talking about from the beginning, can we convert from E2 to an EB5 process? And of course, the answer is yes, under certain circumstances. So we would love to talk about E2s, EB5s. I do like the clients that do come to us because they are fairly sophisticated. They want to know, but unfortunately, they're getting a lot of misinformation out there. So when they come to you, Eliana, or myself, or the right professionals and the right team, then that's what they should really aim for. Okay.
Okay, great. So you would say that if the person wants to do this transition, even before starting, they should start thinking about it. It's not something that they are here in the US with the E2 and later on they will think about doing the transition. So what would be the best timing for the success of the operation?
Well, of course, with the first, conference call, the consultation with the client, in confidence, we're asking the client, what do they want to do as far as their future plans for the US? Do they want to make an investment in their own business or buy an existing business? And if they qualify for E2, because to qualify for E2, as we all know, they have to be a citizen of a country that has an international treaty or agreement with the US. And if they do, in part of the consultation, say, yes, we want to come to the US, we want to invest in a business, and we also may ask, as the attorney, what are your future plans? Well, we may want to, in the future, we may want to get a green card, we may want to get permanent residency, and then we ask, do you want to do this on the basis of your investment? And then at that time, we're discussing whether they may use the E2 business as a basis, as a foundation to convert to EB5, or do they want to set up a separate completely business or invest in an EB5 regional center project? So these are the discussions that we have right from the beginning in the planning. And so besides the attorney discussing their future plans, we bring in a team of professionals, the accountant, international tax accountant, the corporate lawyers, right? So the business plan writer. So we have to see what are going to be their future plans, what do they want to achieve, and then this is part of the initial process. If they say, let's do E2 first, we do it, but with the thought, and the team has a thought that maybe in the future, you may want to convert their E2 to an EB5.
Okay, great. Can you tell us, like, there is like a right journey to do this, like the steps from point A to point B?
Yes, and then we can talk about this all day about
I
E2.
imagine.
So the E2 is going to be based upon an initial investment in the business, which is either going to be created or that's going to be purchased. It's an existing business. And if they want to do an E2, then the major rule is that they have to make a substantial investment, and that investment has to be irrevocably committed. And we say, okay, what is a substantial investment? Is there a minimum investment requirement? No, there's no minimum requirement, but based upon practice, based upon experience, it's usually at least around about 100,000. It can be less, but usually let's say 100,000 as an investment. Does it have to be substantial? Well, substantial means that it has to match what it would take to buy an existing business or start a business. So if they're buying an existing business and the assets, and the business is worth 150,000 and they're investing 100, then we may suggest invest 150. If it's a purchase of assets of an existing business 200,000, then we just suggest invest 200,000. So the correlation between the initial amount that they're putting in and what it's going to take to start this business is substantial. If it's going to be something they create themselves and they say, look, we only need 100 to create something from the beginning, then it's 100. So we have to look at the facts of what the existing business, what it would take to buy the assets of that business, or what it would take to start something. And then the next requirement is irrevocable commitment. And of course, every investor is going to say, Eliana, you know what, we're making an investment, but what if we don't get the visa from the consulate? What if they don't allow us in? So based upon the rules and the practice, we can show that the corporate lawyers in the corporation they're forming for the E2 is setting up a trust, an escrow account. It can be an irrevocable escrow account with the agreement, irrevocable agreement, that once the funds go in there, let's say to purchase an existing business or to set something up to start spending the money, which is a requirement, is that the contract can say the lawyer, the corporate lawyer, will release those funds once the E2 visa is granted and once they make an E2 entry into the US. So they're complying with the laws, the regulation, the policy by showing an E2 they've made an irrevocable commitment and showing that to the US consulate. And they have peace of mind, though, that the funds are in an irrevocable trust account. They don't control it. The corporate lawyer controls it and will release those funds when it's granted. So it's satisfying the consulate, it's satisfying the requirements that they've already irrevocably committed these funds, but it's giving peace of mind to the investor that they're not actually letting that money go if they don't get the visa for whatever reason. With our clients, 99.9% they're going to get the visa, right? In the state, it'll give peace of mind.
Okay, great. And I'm just going to do a little recap here on some questions that I have people that are asking me all the time
Sure.
regarding the E2
Yeah.
that and I see that you emphasize to have like a irrevocable trust, like the money to be here in the US. I have people that ask me, okay, should I send the money from my personal account in my origin and to directly to the bank account of the person who was I'm buying that business, or no, or is there like the best way of doing it? I would say, the trust would be the best way, but if it is not like a case, it will work anyway.
Well, like as the attorney, we have to provide our experience, what will work, right? Based upon the laws, regulations, policies. And of course, when we look at E2, it can be a personal commitment, right, by the citizen of the country that has a treaty with the US, right? And so usually if we're going to buy the individual going to be making the investment because they are a citizen of that country, well, then we would suggest that we authenticate their source of funds,
Okay.
right? Where did the money come from and the path of funds and the funds going into their personal bank account and then from their personal account to the US corporate account, which is going to be the E2 business, right? That's the ideal situation. That's what we would suggest. So the foreign corporation then becomes the owner of the E2 business because we have to show the ownership of the foreign corporation is the owner is a citizen of the treaty country. We've done that before as well, right? So it's a transfer from the foreign corporation of funds into the US E2 corporation, okay? So it depends on which way they want to do it. But later on, if we want to do the E2 transitioning to an EB5, then that's part of their plan. Then we would strongly suggest that the funds are coming in from the funds are coming into the personal account of the foreign investor, and then from the personal account, the funds are going into the E2 business. That would be a better foundation, in my opinion, for the transition to EB5.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Edward. Let me get a little bit more legal, okay, because there is a lot of questions regarding to that.
Sure.
So, can an existing E2 business realistically qualify to the EB5 if the person is already here? What are the key compliances on
Yeah.
this situation?
Okay. I think that, you know, we could talk again all day about this.
Yeah,
And we can enjoy
I
the
know.
discussion. We'll enjoy it. We'll enjoy it. But, you know, if someone, as I said, there's two scenarios. When someone is planning from the beginning that they want to go from E2 to EB5, or they come to us already with an E2 and say, can we convert this E2 business to EB5, right? So we know that E2, as we just discussed, requires, you know, an irrevocable commitment of funds, etc. We know that the E2 business, right, needs to show that the government, with a business plan, that it's not a marginal investment. Marginality refers to, is there a likelihood of growth of employees, you know, full-time, part-time, or even independent contractors? Is there a potential growth to avoid marginality, which could be a ground of dismissal or denial of the E2, right? So the E2 is based upon an investment and the fact that there will be job creation, right? That's the E2. And in the business plan, we submit it and they can get approved. Now we come to the EB5. Can we use this E2 business to move into an EB5 scenario? So if we're looking at two types of EB5, EB5 direct or EB5 regional center. If there's one investor that's going to be making the investment or already has made the investment in the US business, then it's considered to be EB5 direct. That investor, E2 investor, now says, I want to convert my E2 business to an EB5 direct. So now we have to show through evidence and a EB5 business plan that the right investment amount has been made or will be made into the US EB5 business, and that according to the business plan, there's a nexus between the investment amount and the required job creation under EB5 direct. And the required EB5 job creation for a direct EB5 investment is that the funds have to lead to a nexus to the required number of jobs being created, in this case, 10 full-time employees. At least each employee is working 35 hours per week. They either have to be US citizens or permanent residents. So if we say, okay, that's a requirement, with the E2 business, let's say someone has made an investment of 100,000 in the E2 and they made it a year ago and 10 jobs have been created, but only 2 of those jobs are full-time jobs and only 2 can be proved that they are either US citizens or permanent residents. Well, if we want to convert from E2 to EB5, we may be able to count those 2 jobs. You probably won't be able to count the part-time jobs, right? Or independent contractors, especially if they're not US citizens or permanent residents. The only time we may want to count 2 part-time jobs if they're equivalent to the same job, but each person's working half the time, but it's the
Okay.
same job, okay? But that can get a little bit complicated. So now we have to show that with the EB5 business plan that we're counting the $100,000 initially that was invested for E2. We've authenticated the source of funds that came in from the personal account of the investor into the E2 business. And now we're going to show and authenticate that the E2 investor is able to come up, if it's going to be in a target employment area or area of high unemployment, for example, they're going to come up with a total of 800,000. They've already done 100,000 for the E2. Now they're going to come up with the other 700,000. They've authenticated the source, the path, and the transfer of funds into their personal account before they put it into the E2 or EB5 business now.
Okay.
Right? So we're still recommending a personal insertion of capital. If they say, well, we've built up this E2 business, we would put 100,000, then we built up the E2 business, now it's worth, we've got cash in there of $1 million, can we use that $1 million? Well, we say, sure. We would suggest you take the money out of the E2 business as a distribution or as a payroll or whatever. We bring in the international or local tax CPAs, accountants, to say now the funds are coming out, they personally belong to the investor, and now the investor is transitioning and putting that money back into the EB5 business, and then showing that as a result of that insertion, it's going to create the jobs, it's going to create business activity.
Wow, that's something that I was curious to know. I had people asking me exactly that. I started with an E2, my business grew a lot, so I have like $1 million in the company's bank account. Can we use that towards an EB5? So he needs to bring that money to his personal account, pay all the taxes, and then
Yes.
and put it back in.
Let me tell you something. I don't want to confuse everyone. We had a question the other day from a EB5 potential investor. He says, I own this corporation. 100%, I own it. But I want to transfer the funds from the corporation into the EB5 business. So this corporation is transferring the funds into the EB5 business. And we said you would have to get your corporate lawyers and your certified public accountants to show proof that you are the 100% owner of the business, that it is your funds, that these are your funds, not the corporation's funds, your funds, that you're going to transfer them from the corporation into the EB5 business.
Okay.
Okay. And it's not an E2 business transferring funds into the same E2 business or using those funds, but it gets complicated, right? You can make arguments. In this case, the EB5 investment was going to be in a regional center. The person was saying, I've got funds in my own corporation. I want to take the funds from the corporation, put it into an EB5 regional center business. So the accountant's saying, yes, the corporate attorney saying, yes, we can show that it belongs to that individual.
Okay.
If that individual wants to do it, there's a risk that the government may not treat it as their personal investment. They would have to still make arguments that the corporate lawyers and the accountants are saying, yes, it is belonging to the individual investor, but they're taking a risk.
Okay. All right. So I understand if it is the case, they can choose instead of a business, a regular EB5, they can go also towards the regional center then. It
Well,
doesn't
yeah.
really need to be on the same business of the E2.
Well, so if now this is what they can do. Let's say they've come into the US, they have an E2, and they spend 100,000 on the E2 business, and they say, well, we want to use their own business for EB5.
Mm-hmm.
They may choose to put money into their own E2 business, or they say, we're here under the E2 status. We may want to put the new money for an EB5 into another business that they control and operate. So it could be another new business for their EB5 insertion of capital.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
they want to, or they can put their new EB5 money into an EB5 regional center project, which means someone else is developing the project and taking care of the employment, taking care of the business plan, etc. So now we would suggest that we sit down and they do a cost analysis of which is going to be more lucrative, which is going to be more cost effective for that E2 investor or that foreign investor, whether they put money in their own business or an EB5 regional center business, which means they only have to worry about the attorney's fees. They only have to worry about the investment amount. They go to a reputable EB5 regional center company. They put the money there. They walk away. Hopefully there will be a return of capital. Hopefully the jobs are going to be created, but they walk away and they still are involved. And they compare doing that to the cost and the of running their own EB5 business, spending money on the business plan, spending money on hiring people, spending money on operating. So they have to compare what they really want to do from a cost standpoint, from a desired standpoint. Do they really want to operate their own business, or do they just want to get a green card, right?
Okay, great. And is there, like, I understand for the EB5 direct, they need to generate 10 jobs. Is that correct?
It has to be a nexus, there
Okay.
has to be, and that's why we have the business plan, and that's why sometimes they can bring in a fund administrator to make sure that the funds that are going into their own project are going to be used for job creation,
Okay.
right? There's a nexus. Is it going to be spent on operations? Is it going to be spent on inventory? How do we show through the business plan that there's a connection between the money they're putting in and the jobs being created?
Okay. And is there like a limited time, like on the business plan, they need to show that those jobs will be created on the first year or throughout the next years?
Yeah.
How it is the best way to show it?
Well, first of all, if we do EB5, they have to file their EB5 petition showing that they've authenticated the source of funds. And with their petition, they're showing a business plan, right? And the business plan is going to say, okay, usually the EB5 petition is going to be approved and they may get the conditional residency within the year, okay? Or before or after. And then they have the conditional residency for 2 years. Well, at the end of the 2 years, they file a petition to remove the condition to show the investment amount that they put into the business was left in the business.
Okay.
They didn't get it back because it had to be sustained with the business, and the necessary jobs were created.
Okay.
Through proof. And there's certain documents that we would show the government when they're preparing their petition to remove the conditions that the investment was sustained and the jobs were created. So they may have a 3-year period to, in that period of time to show jobs are created. We'd like to think that they're creating the necessary jobs after 1 year of operation, or the necessary jobs, they sustain those jobs for that 2-year period. Now, we have to be very, very careful. In 2022, there was a new EB5 law called the Reform Integrity Act, the RIA. And it basically made a statement to say that the funds can be returned to the investor within 2 years of the investment and the jobs have to be created, 2 years. But there was no regulation interpreting that law to say, what do they mean by that? The 2 years return of capital. So because of the uncertainty of no regulations, and there's some case law about sustainment, etc., the conservative approach, regardless of what the laws may say, that the documents that the investor signs with the regional center or the documents that they are entering into for their own project, they could easily say, look, we want to keep these funds until the end of the 2 years of conditional residency, and then we want to show that jobs are going to be created during this period of time, and that's it. So at the time, the conservative approach is at the time of the 829 filing, after 2 years of conditional residency, they're going to submit a petition with supporting documents to the USCIS saying jobs are created that were required and the investment money that I put into the project has been sustained. Okay.
So it's a process. It's not
Yeah.
something that a person will just apply for EB5 and get the green card right away. They
Well,
need,
they can get it right away, a conditional
okay.
green card,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have to show that the jobs are created at the time they get their conditional green card. It's a
Okay.
process, it's a plan of creating those jobs. But I would suggest that they need to start creating these 10 jobs at least at the beginning of the 2 years of conditional residency to show a history of maintaining, sustaining those jobs, not just
Awesome.
having 10 jobs 2 months before they file their H-9 to remove the conditions, right?
Okay, it has to be a sustained job. We need to prove in this process that those jobs will be continuously there, that they need to be there
That,
in order to
well,
the business to be operational.
we're suggesting that, like
Okay.
sometimes if they don't have all the jobs when we file the H-9 at the end of the 2 years, we may be able to say to the government they need another 6 months, 7 months to come up to the total 10 jobs, right? We want to be conservative. We want to be able to say to our clients, look, let's look at the best scenario for you to be in. Okay.
Sure, sure. I agree too.
Yeah.
Edward, what are the challenges providing lawful source of funds? What
Mhm.
are, the challenges that you see the most for
Yeah.
them to do this transition between E2 and EB5?
Okay. Well, there's two questions you've asked: the challenge of source of funds and E2 to EB5.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Actually,
So,
yes.
so the source of funds, authenticating the source of funds. So when we submit the EB5 petition, it's a 526 if it's direct. If it's a regional center, it's an I-526E. Um, authenticating 800,000 or 1,050,000, depending on the location, um, is based upon the preponderance of evidence. And, in the area of law, the standard is preponderance of evidence. And then when you go to a criminal trial, it's beyond all reasonable doubt. And then the government keeps on saying that when we submit evidence, it's preponderance of evidence. But we know that when they come back with sometimes requests for further evidence, what they've done is that they said, if we supply 10 documents and we are supplying 5 that they've accepted or 6, that's preponderance, they should accept and prove that petition. And they keep on saying preponderance, but they really are saying they want to see clear and convincing evidence that if we supply 10 documents, 8 or 9 of those 10 documents they need to accept. So
Okay.
they're, even though they're saying they're applying the correct test, preponderance, they're in reality they're raising the bar to accept and want to accept more of the documents we submit. So that's with source of funds. Authenticating the source and the path of funds based upon reality, the real world, is over here. Based upon what the government wants to see is over here, which is unrealistic, right? But we have to accept what they want to see. So what we try to do, knowing what the government wants to see as far as proof of the source and the path, we ask our clients to supply what we think the government wants to see, not what the test says, preponderance, but we are asked for more and more. And we come up with what we think is based upon our previous experience and success of showing the source of funds. So for $800,000 to show source of funds, we may be coming up with, 5 to 7,000 pages worth of documents.
Wow.
Now, is that necessary? No, it's not necessary, but it's what our experience dictates of what the government wants to see, right? So we have to make it very clear to the adjudicator through our strategy. Our strategy is showing them through fundamental diagrams, boxes, flowcharts, initially where the money is coming from. So if it's one source, where the money is coming from. The second source, where's the money coming from? One source may be 800. If it's two sources, one source, first source may be 400, the second source may be 400. So quickly in our presentation to the USCIS, we're showing the adjudicator immediately, very fundamentally, where the sources are coming from with exhibits, etc. And then we can go into more detail. Because if they see 5 to 6,000 pages and a long narratives they're going to get bored, they may not see it. So we want to have a strategy of clearly, initially, getting that fundamental story of source of funds to the adjudicator immediately. Okay?
Okay, all right. And I was going to ask you some questions regarding job creations, but I think it's clear. So E2 visas, is there like a minimum of employee that they should have to do the transition? No.
No, there's no minimum for E2s. I think we need to show that there are employees,
Okay.
that for E2, as we said in the beginning, some of them may be full-time, some of them may be part-time, some of them may be independent contractors. We want to show that it's a business. I
Mhm.
don't like when we submit an E2 application, they say, oh, we want to operate the business from our house. I don't
Okay.
like that. I think they need to have a location. Initially, when we submit the E2 application, because at least the adjudicator, whether it's in the US or at the consulate, is going to see through a plan that there's a likelihood of having people, right, that they're going to manage, that they're going to have as part of the E2 business, right?
Mhm. Okay, and if they're gonna do the transition for the EB5, you will be the person analyzing the jobs that already exist, if they qualify, if they can be counted towards the
Exactly,
EB5.
exactly. Right, but remember, we also have to be careful that if they are doing their own EB5 direct and they're saying, well, it's in a target employment area of high unemployment or it's a rural area, we want to show their business corporation, business operation is in those geographical areas. And then this is where the jobs are going to be created in these areas. We don't want to say, okay, if they're doing an EB5 direct, and they say, oh, yeah, we're going to hire 10 people. And then, in my opinion, if the operation is in that target employment area or rural area, but the people that are going to be hired are in, let's say this is in Florida, the TEA, and then they're going to say, well, the people we're hiring are really in California or New York. I don't think the government's going to like that. They're going to like to see that the jobs are really being created in that target employment area or rural area where the EB5 business is.
Mhm. No, of course, it makes total sense. And what are the risks involved, or I would say the common mistakes that people do when they really want to do this E2 and EB5 transition? What are usually the mistakes people
Okay.
that you encounter?
Okay. The biggest mistake we're seeing is that, and this is unfortunate, you know, they're going to the wrong lawyers, they're going to the wrong professionals, they're going to the people that don't have the expertise and experience, and they're jumping into this, they're filing, they may get denied, they may be approved, but their future plans are hindered by the wrong advice. And when I say it's not just lawyers, it's not just immigration lawyers, it's wrong advice by accountants, wrong advice by corporate lawyers, wrong advice by financial planners. It's either wrong advice or they're not getting that advice at all.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, as an example, they may go directly to a lawyer and they say, we want to do an E2. The lawyer says, fine, let's do the E2. But they're not suggesting to the client, let's bring in a team of professionals to make sure that we protect your wealth, right? They've worked very hard for their money. And now they're coming into a new country. Even though they've been successful in their own country, now they're coming to the US and it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Different rules,
Yeah.
different policies, different protocols. So if they want to protect their wealth, we introduce them to US accountants, corporate lawyers, banks, financial advisors. And even though we're only giving immigration advice, they may say, well, look, whether it's E2 or EB5, we want to protect our wealth. They've worked very hard for their investment. So whether it's 100,000, 200,000 for an E2 or 800,000 at least for an EB5, if they go to, let's say, as an example, invest their 800,000 in their own business or an EB5 regional center business, the investment has to be at risk, 100% at risk. And they say, well, we want to protect that money. They've worked
Yeah.
hard for that money. So we might say, okay, as a hedge to protect their wealth, I may say, how can we do that? Well, they may invest in real estate, could be a townhome that grows in value. It may be a management company that brings in rental income for that townhome. So they say, oh, but can we use that townhome and say that's our investment? No, they put the cash into the townhome. They go to a mortgage company, take the mortgage money out, and then use it as an either E2 or EB5 investment. They may say, well, what's other ways of protecting their wealth? Well, because remember, they're investing in E2 and EB5 100% at risk. There cannot be any redemption or guarantees that they're going to get the money out of it or back. So they may go to a bank and say, look, we want to protect our $2 million or $1 million. Well, you can buy treasuries, you can buy bonds, money market accounts. So they put their cash into the bank, and then they go to the bank and say, oh, we put all this cash in, can we borrow against these assets? Yes. The bank says, yes, here's your 800,000 or here's whatever money you need. And then they take that money to make an investment, as an example, in their EB5 business. So it's a hedge against the risk of loss, but the money that they're bringing in is being protected to a certain extent by investing in other wealth management products like real estate and treasuries, etc. So it's a way of protecting them. Now, a lot of lawyers, a lot of advisors don't advise that at all.
Yeah.
But we're saying, look, we've been doing this for 45 years. Why not understand that they're coming to a new country? They don't know about maybe business operations fully. They don't know about what to do, but they need to get the right advisors as a team. We're not giving them advice on investment advice or real estate or bank financing. We're saying talk to the professionals, talk to the other people, and we coordinate the activity of what they're doing with our immigration process.
Yeah, that's a very important advice, Edward. I like in this industry, and I don't have that many years, but unfortunately, we've seen stories, that people that come do an E2 just because they just have a dream or an idea. They don't investigate the market. They never worked on that industry. So I think it's a very, very wise decision for them to think about it. Like we have, also ways to help these people. Like where I always say, oh, if you're not sure, do a market research before. It's better you invest a little bit of money, understanding if you understand your business in Brazil or in whatever country you are, Colombia, if this is going to be the same scenario here, so you minimize your risks, not to understand. So and it's very valuable to have an attorney that is thinking about your risks, that is helping you to take the right decisions too.
Yeah, because basically, look, I'm from Australia originally, right? Third generation Australian, and we have Australians, British, we have Germans, Brazilians, every nationality, Chinese, Indians, and we know that people can be very successful in their own country.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? Right? It's different in the US. My father, when he migrated to the US, we came as a family. He was a very successful business person in Australia, very successful. And he came here and he wanted to start his own business. But the professionals we saw, the lawyers, the accountants, said it's different.
Exactly.
Different. And that's why we want to be offering the best legal advice, but understanding that we want to look after. We want to, do things to see how we can protect those clients and those investors. Okay.
Yeah, that's really important. And we want them to be successful and happy, and just not like have a bad experience losing money. Like you said, it's really hard to get money, especially if you're from Latin American. We know the challenge today, so it's very important.
And over the years, I'll age myself now. I've been president of the Australian American Chamber of Commerce for Florida, the resident director of the Australian New Zealand American Chamber of Commerce for the US. I've been president of the British American Chamber of Commerce, currently on the board of directors of the British American Business Council, and vice president of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce of Central Florida. So we have been involved, or I have been involved in international organizations. And definitely one of the things that we understand is that when people are coming from other countries, as we just said, we feel for them. We want to protect them in
Mhm.
all different ways. Okay.
All right. What would you say, like thinking about on the point of view, the USCIS and consulates with the current scenario, how do you think the USCIS and consulates are treating those cases, like E2s and EB5s? How do you see this today?
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely with the E2. The good news is that if anyone's a citizen of an E2 country, we prepare their E2 application to show that they are an investor, the business complies with an E2 business, and we submit the documents according to the order of what they want to see as far as exhibits and information directly to the consulate, right?
Okay.
So they're looking at the business plan, the consulate, they're looking at the information supplied, and they will be interviewing the E2 investor about their investment, and they could be asked questions from what is submitted. So it's a direct approach, and we need to make sure that at E2 investor is familiar with the submission, the business plan, the E2 requirements, the source of funds, the irrevocable commitment of funds, job creation. They have to be very familiar because they will be interviewed, right? That's for the E2 visa application process. Now, if someone has entered the US as a visitor under a B2, or they're in some other type of status, a student status, and they're in the US and they want to change status from another non-immigrant status to an E2 status, then we will prepare the E2 petition with a business plan, supporting documentation, source of funds, what type of business, and we're changing their status from another non-immigrant status to an E2 status, and we do that for the family members as well, where the spouse can get work authorization, etc., and children will get status to continue their school. So if we do that, right, then there's no interview. We submit the petition, we expedite the petition, they could get an answer back, maybe 10 days, whatever. And then they're changing from a non-immigrant status to an E2 status. Now, remember, we have to be very careful that if they entered in a non-immigrant status, let's say B2 visitor status, there's enough 90 days has passed before they say, I'm changing status. Because we don't want the government to say, well, you had a preconceived intent to change your status to a work status if you came in as a visitor. So status extensions for 2 years don't need an interview. They don't need a visa. It's a status change. B2 visitor status to E2. But if they go to the consulate, well, then there's an interview. Same thing with EB5.
Okay.
If they're here under an E2 status and they've been here for at least 90 days without leaving the country, and they say, we want to do EB5, they file their EB5 petition, 526, and they file their concurrent application for adjusting to EB5 with a application for employment authorization, application for permission to leave and travel. But they do that again after they've been here for 90 days as a non-immigrant. There's certain non-immigrant statuses that have dual intent, H1B and L1, right? You can have the intent to be, but most times that they want to be here, apply for adjustment with their EB5 petition, and then they can get their conditional residency without an interview. No interview. Okay. If they file the EB5 petition and they want to travel in and out, and when the petition is approved, then they go to the consulate for a conditional green card interview themselves as family, then there will be an interview. And there could be questions from the consulate about the EB5 business. Verbal question. Besides, what we originally submitted with the EB5 petition, the business plan showing job creation and investment amounts. So there's two ways of doing it. In the US, changing status to E2. In the US, adjusting status from, their E2 maybe to an EB5 status and getting their green card in the US without having to leave.
Okay, great options. Well, thank you so much, Edward. You've, definitely clear out a lot of questions that I even myself had it. And I'm pretty sure the people who will be listening will learn a lot from you. And I'm pretty sure you have a lot of to talk about. There is other, options too. But
Yes.
to wrap it up, can you share like a case or like a success story that you'd like to share with us?
Sure, sure. I can't mention names and I don't want to get too much into the facts, but
Of
I
course.
want to leave you with this, right? And I'll tell you some of our stories. I always, towards the end of a presentation, I have an expression, right? Self-help, right? Self-help. The last word in self-help is help. The last word in self-help is help. In other words, when someone is coming in and they think they can do it themselves or they don't need other people and they can do it themselves, self-help, the last word in self-help is help. You get the help of other people to help you. But, let me tell you about an E2 to a transition. We had a client that invested, uh, I've got so many different scenarios. They invested $1 million for an E2
Wow.
and for restaurants. And they made the investment and they saved 200 jobs because the business was troubled. And then it was a restaurant business. Then they came to us and said, we want to get a green card. Can we use that, at least that $1 million that was used to buy the business? And we said, yes, we can use that money and we can use the jobs that were already existing. Because usually with EB5, you make the investment and there has to be the creation of new jobs. You can't count the existing jobs. But
Okay.
because this was a troubled business, this was in trouble financially, and that's what saved 200 jobs. The person came in with $1 million. So we used our professionals to show that it was a troubled business according to the EB5 definition, and we were able to count the existing jobs. Right.
Okay.
So that's one scenario. Right.
That's a very good one.
So we were able to do that. But we've had many other stories where EB5, where people have made an investment in an EB5 business, where they've created the jobs. The jobs have been created uh, uh, in such a way where they are being paid a reasonable salary, right? They don't have to be paid a top salary. So we had a client that says, okay, they came in under an L1, intra-company transfer. Okay. And they said, well, gee, now we have a new office set up, right? So they have a big foreign operation. They said, we want to open up a company that's going to be doing certain business activities and we want to have a subsidiary. So the foreign parent company said, okay, we're going to open up a subsidiary, 51% ownership by the parent company. And we're going to have a business plan that we're going to have within 1 year the necessary jobs in the organizational hierarchy to justify the extension from an L1 new office to another couple of years. And the foreign investor and his family wanted to be here. So with the L1 scenario, you can make an investment. So they 200,000, they just set it up. And for the business plan to be submitted for them to get the L1, they had to show that within 1 year, it's a new office setup, that they will be considered an executive towards the end of that first year. So if you're creating a L1 business, it's not so much the investment or the employees that you're creating, but you have to show that within that 1 year, you as the investor are going to be considered to be an executive by definition, by immigration definition, which means you're interacting with higher level executives. And you would have to, within that 1 year, employ high level executives, high level managers that they would interact with, that individual who's coming on the L1 will be able to get an extension to show that there's high level people that are on the payroll, international that they will interact with these higher level executives. So we sit down with that individual and say, okay, the cost of expanding your L1 business, right, having high level executives, paying payroll, and expanding the business to actually support an organizational hierarchy to justify you getting the extension under the L1 for executive. Let's compare that to the cost of doing EB5.
Okay.
And so we're going to say, look, if you convert your business, instead of extending the L1 for that year, spending the money to show an L1 business, to extend it, and then once you have the organizational hierarchy, of course, you can go from L1 to EB1C, which is the intra-company part of the green card. But then we compare the cost of doing an EB5.
Okay.
You're going from an L1 to an EB5. And an EB5 is $800,000 investment. And comparing that to the cost of expanding the L1 business with high-level executives, and then showing that you will hire 10 employees, not high-level executives, but you can be 10 employees full-time that don't have to be paid as much.
Okay.
And then when you file your EB5 petition, you've got, the next couple of years to employ those people. You don't have to do it within 1 year under the L. So now that's a success story, going from L1 to EB5.
Wow.
Right? Immediately after, 6 months being here, and not having to worry about the cost and the speed of trying to build up the business within 1 year. Now you have a few years.
Okay, that's a good story, definitely. Oh, great. That's, very nice. And thank you so much for sharing, Edward.
You're
Once
welcome.
again, we're on the top of the hour, so I really want to wrap it up thanking you again. It's very valuable to hear from you, to learn from you. And our objective is to, give clarity to our clients, to our potential clients, and to make sure that they understand how important it is to hire the right professional, to make sure that they have a success story to tell, not like a bad story or bad experience. But here in the US, we do believe, if you do things right, you're going to be successful. So I don't know if you want to just wrap it up and with, the final say, we'll just.
Eliana,
Finish up.
what you're saying is 100% correct. And, again, you and I enjoy speaking to people. I love talking to people, getting to know them. And maybe it's because of my age. I love talking to people and getting to say what are their goals, getting to know the family. And it's not just, seeing someone as if they're filling out a form and that's it. We get to know them. And when we start preparing the cases, we get to know what their goals are, what they want to achieve. And to be successful for what you and I do, we want to enjoy the people that we're dealing with. We want to enjoy their success. We want to make sure that they are protecting their family. So it's not just a professional relationship. It's part of that professional relationship, attorney client. It seems that for what we do, it's more than that. Getting to know their family, making sure that they are going to be protected and that they have a wonderful future in the US.
Okay, great. Thank you, Edward.